In December 2021, Vancouver Sun columnist Vaughn Palmer penned a startling piece about BC's forest industry. His headline read, "BC forestry companies expanding at a rapid pace, but not at home." That means BC-based forest companies were and continue to invest heavily in wood product production everywhere but the home province they came from. The flow of forestry capital out of BC is accelerating, including investments made by Canfor, which last year invested $420 million to acquire Alberta-based Millar Western Forest Products. And the rush to get out of BC continues to spiral upward. On the day of this recording, Canfor announced the closing of a pulp line in Prince George and termination of 300 jobs. The good thing is it's not all bad news. There are companies like Teal Jones, a BC forestry success story, the largest family-owned private forestry company on the coast, and it's a perfect example of sustainability. Teal Jones is keeping its BC sawmill operating. But they're not the only ones. In Prince George, the Brink Group of companies is also standing firm, committed to producing wood products here in this province, despite the fact that they don't have a timber license, which is remarkable. John Brink, the founder of the company, is a successful entrepreneur who came to Canada with the proverbial 25 cents in his pocket. He went to work at a sawmill in the north in the 1960s, and that's when he set his sights on owning a wood products manufacturing company, something that he has done, succeeds at, and continues to thrive. Brink says, "It was my dream and it is my passion to ensure forest products and jobs remain a vital part of the BC economy." I invited John Brink to join me for a conversation that matters about the state of forestry in BC. John, welcome.
Stuart, my pleasure.
How bad is it?
There are a number of things at play here, Stuart. Obviously, right now, this moment, the lumber market pricing of lumber is not very good. And that particularly relates to the inflation-related issues. Interest rates have risen, so which is not uncommon. We have been there before a number of times, where interest rates go up because of inflation. And I can think in the 50 years, virtually 50 years that I've been in business, I can count at least 7 or 8 times that has happened. And then the tendency is as prices go up, home building, especially in the States, the primary market for the Canadian and BC manufacturers of lumber is going up, and then the home building will slow down. So that is the one thing that is happening. So that is not unknown. So lumber prices are extremely low right now. The other part, obviously, that plays a role not related to policy is that in BC, in other places of the world, we have been affected, obviously, for the last number of years by COVID-19. That has had a severe effect on not only the obvious things, but also to the supply chain globally and other things related to that. Interrelated to that is that people are hard to find, and for people to get back into the routine of normal, but we consider to be the old normal, finding a new normal which is still in the process of evolving, but is affecting businesses in a general sense that have had an adverse effect. So that then all being said, so those are things that happen in as we speaking in particular about the forest industry, very typical for the forest industry. It has a tendency of being an industry that goes up and down with the market.
At the time that you immigrated to Canada, especially into British Columbia, forestry was the #1 industry in this province.
No question about that.
What, from your perspective, has changed that got us to this
Let's
point?
establish there is no place on earth, in my opinion, that grows better fiber than we do in British Columbia. No question about it.
Well, then how do we
distinctly
explain
different coast and interior, right?
Yeah.
Then, then in terms of, that what's happening to it in terms of, for a long time, the industry was extremely successful. It consolidated. Investors came in. When I came in the 60s, that's the time they built the pulp mills all over the place.
Right.
And the larger investors started to buy up timber and acquired timber licenses, as they call tenure, and accumulated. Up to the 50s, late 40s, around the Prince George area, there were 600 mills, small mills, privately owned. They would go to the bush, to the timber, cut the timber there in a small way, and then shipped it to the planer mills that then loaded it in cars and shipped it to the market, wherever that may be. Then the government policy also remember respectfully that uniquely different in British Columbia from other places, in most cases in the world, is the timber is owned by the people of the province. Right. 96% of the timber is owned by the province. So therefore, the politicians of the day, whoever they may be, decide what the policy will be surrounding that. In the 60s already, they decided that there should be what they called closed utilizations. The mill being in the bush, having a timber license, but cutting up the timber and leaving all the residuals behind. Make it square, leave the rest behind. The government decided, no, there must be closed utilization. So they created incentives to bring in pulp investments, but they had to make concessions so that they would get chips to use as a material in the pulp to manufacture pulp and paper.
That wasn't a bad thing.
That was a good thing.
Yeah.
But it meant that a lot of the smaller operations, they could not put in debarkers and chippers, but that cost 10 times more than the mill cost.
Yeah.
So they started to sell out to others. And others saw that as an opportunity to start accumulating more and more of the timber.
Yeah.
As we go through the period from then till now, that most of the timber in the province of British Columbia is controlled by about 5, 6 companies at most, that have 75% of all the timber rights, all the tenure. That means if you have 75%, then you likely control 100%.
Yeah.
So then surrounding all of that, the cost has gone up substantially. Demands from government have gone up, and then being a government resource, up to about the 80s, mid-80s, government would replant the timber that was harvested, and then to maintain what they call the annual allowable cut.
Right.
Objective is being that hypothetically speaking, if we have 100 trees and it takes 100 years to grow them, then we want to make sure that we plant at least 1 or 2 for every one that we knock down to maintain the annual allowable cut or sustainable.
I got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
So it was still going pretty good through that point. But then Greenpeace and a variety of other NGOs turned their attention towards the forest industry, and the government in British Columbia changed that of Mike Harcourt, and he brought in the Forest Practices Code.
Correct.
Was that the beginning of the change in direction of fortunes for the forest industry?
I believe that globally the marketplace demanded that there be a good practice in terms of preserving timber or growing forest. Mm-hmm. And there was more and more pressure on government and companies to show that they had good forest policies. That's really started them. At the end of the day, it's the marketplace that demands that, if you wish.
So did the Forest Practices Code meet that demand? And did we see a shift in forest practices
Correct.
by forest companies?
Correct. It gradually went in that direction, meaning cost would go up as well, because to everything that you do, there is a cost.
Yes.
Added to all of that then, in the mid-'80s, another thing, and that to me what is so very important is that, that we go through all these periods of up and downs and the inconsistency. The most important thing, will we have enough timber as we go forward?
Yep.
Is there a future in the forest industry? I say to you today, as most other experts would say, is that there is a future, because what we have done since the mid-'80s, are we growing enough fiber for the fiber that we harvest? The answer is yes, because another government policy was in the mid-'80s that they allowed the industry that was harvesting the timber, they must regrow it.
Right.
It was in their interest then to regrow it as quickly as they could before it starts growing up and makes it more difficult.
So companies like West Fraser, for instance, are committed to
Canfor,
planting 2
all the other
trees
ones.
for everyone that they cut down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what we are doing now, to the question, are we growing? Yes, we are. And what does that mean? Well, what does it mean now is that on average we had about, hypothetically speaking, about 60 million cubic meters annually.
Yeah.
That was an annual cut. Add to that then what happened? Pine beetle happened. You know, took out most of the lodgepole point, about approximately one third, 25 to 30% of the lodgepole point in the interior of the province. It was destroyed because of the beetle. Yeah. Then there was an uplift to deal with that, to take as much economic value as possible. It went up as high as 80 million cubic meters, and then from there on it had to go down to the normal level again of 60, and then below that. Add to that fires in 2017, 18, 19 in particular. A lot of fires happened that were also destructive, and then a lot of other policies happened. One of the policies was, by law, obviously, that part of the timber would be allocated to First Nations, maybe up to as much as 20% of the annual allowable cut by law, and correctly so. They
That's
would
okay
share,
too.
and they would share in the revenue, and correctly so. The other thing that happened is that, again, because of global pressure, but also of the enviros, and to a certain extent policy, by the incumbent government, the NDP government currently, is that the deferral of old growth, which about 2.6 million hectares was set aside for deferral of old growth, became very controversial because the old growth in a lot of cases included old growth that most, I suggest, people, including myself, refer to old growth seeing those massive trees that are being cut down, and the question then is that the best economic value? Is that what we should be doing with it, or shouldn't we? Has become a problem, bringing down the available amount of annual allowable cut in and around the 40 million cubic meter. Then there is another volume that is in, without becoming over technically, they call that the undercut, that is not being utilized, meaning that about 35 mills have shut down, sawmills have shut down in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Maybe more to go, maybe another 3, 4, 5 maybe. Mm-hmm. And then also resulting to it because pulp mills rely on the chips that come from
the cotton,
from the sawmill production.
Right.
And for every sawmill, you can approximately say 4 sawmills support 1 pulp mill. Yep. So the inevitable that would happen, and has already happened in a number of places around the province. Last announcement was the Canfor that announced Prince George Pulp is indefinitely shutting down one of their pulp mills in the Prince George region. It just was announced yesterday. Was, in my opinion, inevitable because the economic fiber is not available to justify the operation. Mm-hmm. That's where we are today. And then add to that, what's happening in the market is somewhat separate from all of that. Yeah. That obviously with interest rates being up, housing starts right now are far below where they should be, and prices are just absolutely lousy.
Right.
So
into that mix also was the free trade lumber deal with the United States.
Add to that the other one.
Yeah.
So, there is still, for the last 100 years, there has been a battle between Canada and the United States about access to their market. And the American producers have done everything possible. It doesn't matter what it is. They're going to find some reason or another that should be used. Why? Because they're doing, whatever they can to take that out of their market so the prices go up for them. So that's basically what it all boils down to. Unfortunately, what that has done, we have not been overly effective of dealing with that, because if there was any time, no justification for that, it should be now. Yeah. The other part that is a bit troubling about it, that a lot of the larger companies that are operating in British Columbia have most of their interests not here, but in the United States in particular, which kind of makes you wonder, what flag is on the table that particular day in terms as it relates to duties. Mm-hmm. Secondary manufacturers like me and others, are being penalized. With, that duties are suggested, put in place to suggest that the access to timber is subsidized. So therefore, it is unfair to the producers in the United States. That's the argument. Yes. Secondary manufacturers like me and others have no timber. We compete for raw material in the marketplace already, a lot of times with American secondary manufacturers. So we are penalizing the future of our industry is in further manufacturing. How can we add more value, social and economic, to the resource? If we're penalizing you for the fact that you add more value, and the more value you add, the harder you will be penalized, the worse it gets for you. Like a medium-sized company like us, in the last number of years, we paid $60 million in duties that we should never have paid. Wow. Why did that happen? It's because the politicians forgot, or somebody else forgot, to include secondary manufacturers in the argument. Before that, when I was negotiating as part of that team to Lumber 1, 2, and 3, we negotiated a deal that if they should at all apply duties to a secondary manufacturer, they should do it on the basis of the input, not the amount of value we add to it, because that then would further reduce of attracting investment. So what I'm saying to you is simply this, that industry, why are they not investing? A lot of the timber now is controlled by 5, 6 major companies, and the industry makeup has changed. Around the Prince George area, where we used to have 600 mills, I'm not saying that we should do that today, but now we have probably 3 or 4.
This is our second break. We'll be back in a moment.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Premier Eby recognizes that this is a challenge, and yet one of his very first acts in government was to disband the working group that was going to help try and figure this out. How do we get out of this if we don't have the commitment from the provincial level? And I ask that because there's a fabulous book out called A New Spirit of Capitalism, and it was put together by a combination of people under the banner of the Trilateral Commission. And they're basically saying, you want to solve a problem, if you want to create opportunity and move forward, government and industry have to work together. But government can't keep changing rules all the time so that industry doesn't know what the footing is.
Precisely so, Stuart. One of the problems that we have, and I love Canada, I love British Columbia, and I love the forest industry. The problem that we have, unfortunately, we have either left side government, leaning government NDP, or we got the Socrats, or as they call them now, BC Liberals, which is basically the Socrats. So we either have the one or the other, and once you have the one, we lobby them hard, they change it this way, and the other ones, something that capital does not want. They like to know what the rules are. And whatever they are, they can live with it, but they must know what they are. And in all fairness to them, I'm not always on their side, but in this particular case, to get people to invest. And right now, the majors, and I'm not speaking as the vice chair of COFI, or I'm speaking as for Canfor, I'm speaking as a citizen of British Columbia and a secondary manufacturer, is that we must look at, we must be In order to attract investment again, we must be competitive, globally competitive as an industry. Nothing to do with interest rate, nothing to do with prices up and down, but creating consistency. Example, the deferral of old growth included, again, when they first established it, without pointing fingers at any group, but the panel that made the recommendation had about, of the 5 people, 4 of them were clearly opposed to manufacturing and logging of any timber. And so it went too far. And already, of the 11 million hectares of old growth that we have in the province of British Columbia, 75% of that is already set aside. Now we have gone to the part of the province, if this is the province, mainly on the coast is different than the interior. Where in the coast that virtually, it's not just the large trees, but any tree that is older than 250 years considered to be old growth. If you go to the interior, 150 years and older. So you and me can walk to the bush and now we're looking for old growth. But what you're looking for, I'm not saying that you would, but I look for is, something that is obvious. Just outside of Prince George, we have old growth and it is unbelievable, large, beautiful. But a 250-year tree could be this size.
Right.
And we set aside huge amount of volume in that grouping. So we went too far. They should have readjusted that. And then the other part about it is that, that the bureaucracy around it has gone too far. So what we must do as a province, I believe, look at all of that again, in all fairness, and how can we recreate confidence for the industry in terms of saying, okay, I'm ready to invest.
Okay, well, that is the question. How do we recreate that confidence?
The one is deal with the issues of old growth. The second one, there is volume that is now sitting, what they call the undercut, would bring us back up, and I'm not the expert in the field, but I know enough about it that I believe the numbers are right. If you're sitting at 40 million cubic meters annually right now, we can go as high as 50 and still be maintaining the annual allowable cut. So we have to look at those areas, and then, but in the cost part of it as well. The other part about it is that, in particular in the northern half of the province, I say a lot of times in my podcast that I do a program, BC Forest Industry in Transition is John A. Brink, On the Brink. And usually what I say is, that speaking from Prince George, the capital of northern BC, and then I kind of look over my shoulders and saying, there we have this beautiful province and the other half, and then I say, hey guys in the south, that's 80% of the GDP for the province of British Columbia is generated in northern British Columbia. Mm-hmm. But in terms of harvesting or forest availability, we still have a lot of forest there we cannot harvest because of the distances involved. The cost of getting it to operations is too high between stumpage, hauling. We have to create incentives. So what government, precisely to your question, is we have to look at government as being a partner in the industry, not just somebody that has some crazy ideas about things that we can make and put more pressure on somebody that has a large mill or be unrealistic. Government has to become a partner.
Third and final break. We'll be right back.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Are you optimistic?
Oh, absolutely.
I know that as disposition you're optimistic, but I mean, are you optimistic about where we're going to go with forestry in British Columbia?
I think we have issues right now that we have to deal with. The intentions paper that was announced by John Organ, the then Premier, I spoke as the industry on that, but I said the future is a bright one. I believe the future of the industry is, first and foremost, we have to be globally competitive, no question about that. And government has to be. Secondly, we will see innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary. We're not doing enough of that.
Right.
And that part of that is, and I'm putting the finger at the industry, is their issue as well, and they're not dealing with it as effectively as they should. How do we attract further manufacturing? Don't make all 2x4s and spaghetti and pump it down the pipeline if they want it or not. We can do more with this fiber than we are doing right now. And that means attracting investment in secondary manufacturing. But if you do that, then you have to create reasonable expectations of access to fiber.
Yes.
And that's the problem. That's not what we're doing by saying that you have all the fiber and you're not going to participate in that. That's not what you want to do. Then we have an issue because the people will become much more vocal about it. The communities like McKinsey, Fort St. James, Fraser Lake, Houston, Northern BC are going to say, what is happening to our timber or our jobs? How can we invest more money?
Yeah.
So what I'm saying to you, Stuart, is simply this, and I'm saying that to the industry, and and I've always been outspoken about it. Always has served me right, maybe, but I have to be honest about it because I believe in it. It's my passion. Is that government has to become an active partner in recognizing some of the challenges, that we need a primary sector that is competitive. I have no problem with the larger companies like the Canfor, the Westfacer, and the other ones, but they will have to participate and then saying, let's stimulate secondary manufacturing, either by you as a major primary, either by strategic relationships, or otherwise by people that want to invest in secondary manufacturing and have reasonable expectation of access to fiber. But it's happening now a lot of times in the fiber, and especially I say that the future of the industry is innovative primary attached to intensive secondary, and that that's the future, and that up to 50% of the volume being manufactured in the lumber manufacturers will go up the value chain. 25% of the lower grades and 25% of the highest grades. And the value-added sector alone will create as many jobs as the primary sector does. And I believe that is the future.
Well, I'm glad you're optimistic because
Oh, absolutely.
I'm an optimist by disposition, but what you're telling me sounds complex and requires a level of understanding that I'm not always sure that those in positions of government authority fully appreciate.
There is no place on earth better positioned than we are here in British Columbia. In the midterm, it's going to be tough, and it may not be in my lifetime, but I believe that the annual allowable cut that may be now at 35 or 40 million will go back up to 60, and will go, if we invest into the land base, has the potential going up to 90 million. And I believe that 10, 20 years from now, our problem, same as it was in Sweden, that went through the same thing, where they are sitting with too much timber, not enough capacity. That's where we will go.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.